believe it or not everyone brings everything to the table, but everyone brings something. Like, we don't all have it figured out, and definitely took many times for me to fall on my face to figure that one out.
Welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. This is a show presented by Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency. We release new episodes every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central and encourage you to batch up that laundry, put away the dishes, plan for the week ahead, or do any other task that might seem daunting while you give our show a listen. You might just be encouraged to call your therapist, connect with this week's guest, or seek out those services you've been considering for a while but haven't made the commitment to yet. If you are in the state of Iowa and are in need of mental or behavioral health counseling, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and welcome back to the You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I am the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions Counseling Agency in Iowa.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am our vice president in charge of the behavioral health department. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are a podcast designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
So our guest today is the founder of the Konigreich Foundation. She is a lifelong advocate of mental health. She is a person who is living by example every single day, who is sharing her story, sharing her message with anybody and everybody in the hopes of helping and reaching one person who needs it, and then the next person who needs it. And the way that we do that is we share what we've been through. We pass it down to the next person. We reach our hand back and we pull that next person up. And our guest today is a living, breathing example of that. So we've got Annalise Keck here with us today. Welcome, Annalise. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that introduction.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're such an advocate for mental health.
I'm a big advocate for mental health. I've actually struggled with mental health my entire life. My mental health journey starts when I was 15, maybe more so 13, but I actually survived a suicide attempt when I was 15. And that's when I got into therapy. My family didn't exactly know how to communicate it. We lived in a very performance-based household, and we didn't talk about that stuff, and I don't think a lot of people do. So that's when I really started being like, we need to talk about stuff like this more. That was an interesting part growing up with that. And I really got to get into it more so is because when I saw how my mental health started affecting my loved ones is when I started to go more into therapy. Like, it's one thing when it affects your life, but when you see how it affects your other people in your life, like I was diagnosed with anxiety and PTSD. So seeing how it affects other people, it just breaks my heart. So I don't want to stay in the problem when I know there is a solution. And I've done therapy for on and off for about 12 years.
So when, okay, so you had your first suicide attempt then at 15, and then what happened? Was your parents like first instinct to like get you into counseling, or how did you kind of start that journey into going to therapy?
Yeah, so I was pulled out of school and we focused on therapy and getting that going. And it was an interesting experience because they weren't used to it either, neither was I. And that went on for about a year. And I was never put on any medicine or anything. But we figured out some stuff and we went forward. And I thought I had figured stuff out, but I wasn't being 100% vulnerable because I didn't feel safe 100%. And to really work through mental health stuff, I've learned that you really have to feel safe. But I did notice a huge difference. I worked both independently with that counselor and also as a family dynamic. And we reworked a lot of because I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 7, so that had a major contributing factor. And just a lot of anxiety and PTSD with that. And as time went on, we were able to rework a lot of stuff through cognitive behavior therapy. And that's been one of the main sources of my therapy. And I had my second, I've attempted 3 times. My second one was when I was 21. I had survived a sexual assault. And basically I was told, don't report it because it doesn't matter, whatever, kind of, basically they kind of silenced me. And it took me 5 years before I even told anyone. And finally I talked about it in therapy, and I didn't even realize how much it was affecting me every day. And I would get into these almost like spirals where one thing would trigger me and it would affect my entire life, and everything would just be blown way out of proportion. And I was in a long-term relationship at the time, and and it was affecting them majorly, and it wasn't fair. So I really dug deep and also continued doing therapy in regards to that, and it really helped. And it's just 1% change every day makes a huge difference. And I've been very thankful. I've had good experiences with therapy and also not the best. But the thing is, it's like each person's gonna gel differently. You just have to find your person to help you with. And I've been very thankful to find some really awesome therapists and during my duration of this. And yeah.
Absolutely. And you identified for yourself, that safety is so important when you're doing that hard work in counseling, and when you're doing that healing work. The safety to be vulnerable is so key because the vulnerability is so essential. And so I love that you identify that for yourself too as that key component, because it sounds like it wasn't always there in some of the counseling relationships, and then it is there in some of them. So that is wonderful insight. So can you tell me more about how your epilepsy impacted your mental health and your family relationships?
So I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 7, and they told me that I would eventually either outgrow it or I would never be able to drive or whatever. I went through 40 different medication trials for the duration of, I think it was 6 years. Um, and there was a lot of anxiety because my life was dictated when I would have my next seizure. And I have 5 different types of seizures. Eventually, I did get them under control, but we had to think of different solution because I would never be able to work a regular 9 to 5. Um, so I ended up going into business and taking control back. But there was a lot of, my number one trigger for seizures was anxiety, and one would trigger the other. And it caused a lot of anxiety for my parents too, and my family. I mean, I was having seizures. It's a type of seizure where you walk onto the road at the bus stop. And like my poor parents, they didn't understand. I mean, just even having to leave your daughter at the bus stop could be dangerous. And when I didn't follow certain, like I am sleep and taking care of myself, I mean, like I was 13 who wants to go to bed at like 9 p.m. on New Year's Eve, but like I had to. One time I didn't. I ended up having a shaking seizure. Actually, almost ended up dying. My face turned blue. My parents had to do CPR. Um, that really had in a um protective state for a lot of years, and it continued. And it's hard. And seeing that. Like, it's not it's not easy, but it is what it is. We work through a lot of that stuff in therapy. They mentioned it themselves because, I mean, I still remember even waking up from that seizure. My dad had done CPR on me. My mom was in tears trying to shield my brother from it. Like, my brother, he doesn't have he doesn't really deal with mental health or epilepsy or anything, but him seeing it, it's a lot. It's a lot for anyone. And my parents were really awesome in doing everything they could with my mental health and what do you call it? My epilepsy. Like, we tried so many different things, but the thing is with epilepsy, it's trial and error with the medication. There's no set, like, this is going to control your seizures. There's a lot about, like, even the brain we don't know, we don't understand. And through all of the trials, it was interesting, but it is what it is. We were able to get to a point where I now can drive, which I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse. But I now live a life where I don't have to deal with seizures. I do have my side effects, but the reality is, it's like a lot of that stuff can be controlled through diet, just like with mental health. There's different, like, what you put into your body. If you put junk food in, you're not feel great, vice versa. So they put me on different diets, like ketogenic diet. It was actually made for epileptics. I found that also helped with my mental health. And they're just little things. It's honestly just the little things I've noticed. And self-care is so important too. And me personally, like, I didn't do self-care for years. I'm just like, I would go until I was burnt out. But it's it is what it is. Thankfully, I had um good support good support system growing up in regards to the epilepsy, and got into therapy early, and yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like you said like you'd have anxiety about getting a seizure, and then anxiety would trigger the seizure. So it was kind of just like a continuous cycle there. Do you think then, like, once you were able to start therapy when you were 15, it sounds like, is that when you started like CBT? Did that help with kind of like regulating what was causing the seizures?
To a degree, yes, but not really, because my seizures weren't controlled at the time. So the anxiety helped. I could understand my anxiety better and manage that a little bit better. But at the same time, I was still having an insane amount of seizures. And I had to go through different medications to try and get them controlled. And eventually I did get them controlled, but there was one medication where the seizures were controlled, but I couldn't produce a thought because the brain fog was so bad. So because all the side effects, you have to go through all the scary side effects on the back to get a chance at getting the seizures controlled. And the side effects have to be manageable. So, and I had lost so much weight to the point where it was unhealthy. And there was just a lot of stuff that had made the anxiety worse. And thankfully, I did get them controlled, and we used a variation of things, but it took a bit, and it was so much. It was so worth it though, going through all of that to get to a spot where I can be like, I don't have to have my life dictated when I'm going to have my next seizure. And just being more like, was it a long, was it a, it was an interesting road. It was difficult, but it was so worth it.
Absolutely. I mean, all of the trial and error that comes with getting that correct medication plan and getting the all of the things in place, it's more than a full-time job at that age to be constantly juggling all of these things. And so even when you're not doing things to actively manage it, right, where your hands are doing things, your brain is working all the time to think about the next one, think about what you need to do for prevention, think about the side effects you're having, right, and that next medication management meeting, and just all of those things. And then you had mentioned how it impacted other people, and you've mentioned that a couple of times. It seems like you are very in tune with how the people around you are feeling and how the people around you are impacted by things. Is that something that you've always felt or had, or is that something you've kind of developed through this process?
I think it's a bit of both. I've so I'm also trained in suicide prevention, but I've also been someone who has been through the process myself, and then I've also had loved ones, and I've dealt with all of it, all sides, and I've also seen when a panic attack starts happening, how other people almost don't know how to deal with it, because like it's not very common to see it, and my panic attacks will sometimes lead to seizures, have led to seizures in the past, or an increase in um, uh, epileptic side effects. And I've always been, I'm like, if I can manage this somehow and help others, just because it can create chaos, because people are very empathetic. People, it goes back to energy people, how they transfer energy almost. And like they pick up on stuff. I mean, because if you have high anxiety and you go to coffee or whatever, your phone's gonna pick up on that. So, and I was living, I mean, probably up until 2 years ago, I was living life chaotically still. I will be the first one to admit that. And last year I did a huge deep dive into things I thought I started working through, but like I noticed how it was also holding in my body. Because I didn't even realize this, but you can hold like anxiety in your body. I had back pain for the longest time, just kind of accepted it. But the more I worked through my stuff, the less I was holding anxiety in my body and things like that. And these were things that were maybe like 10 years in the making. But I was also able to show up better for the people in my life. And I'm also a lot happier. And I'm able to show up better in my business. There's such a correlation between how your business operates and how you operate. Because if you're not showing up for 100%, well, the money's probably not going to be coming at the 100% where it can be, which as a business owner, probably. So when I even do mental health work, it's almost like working on my business too, because it's a better opportunity for my business to thrive because I'm showing up better, and also for the people in my life because they won't have to feel like they have to walk on eggshells. And that was actually something growing up that my parents often felt like they had to do, like they were walking on eggshells, and that's not fair. Like I understand that stuff has happened to me. It's not my fault, but it is my responsibility, I believe, to get it under control. And I don't want my life to be dictated when my next mental health thing is gonna maybe happen or whatever, and can potentially create a spiral. Because if a spiral happens, so I call it, affects my entire life. It will affect my relationships, my business, my mental health in general, and my epilepsy. And honestly, who knows how long it could go on. And that's not fair. So, but yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned, so when you first started therapy, it didn't necessarily work. You said like you didn't feel safe to be vulnerable yet. What kind of things do you think helped as you continued with therapy or tried different therapists that helped you feel safe?
Honestly, the connection. It took a while. It usually takes a while for me to lower my guard. Um, I started actually seeing a life coach as well. And they were fantastic. They really were like, I'm here for you. Like, I see you. Because when I was going this past year, when I was going through everything, I had dealt with 2 life coaches and a therapist. And also there was a community behind the life coaches. And I think community is such an important thing. And it's not talked about enough, especially in mental health. And they would say to me, like, we love you more than your bad days. And I think having any support in like that in any capacity is such a huge thing. Because I was having a lot of bad days. And they didn't see me truly at my best. And the therapist was absolutely fantastic, and she helped me through a lot of that, a lot of stuff that was maybe a little more advanced, that with cognitive behavior therapy, because that's the type of therapy I was going through, and that has always been very helpful for me when basically rewiring your brain in regards to different events, because it's almost like a flow into different areas of your life, because if you react one way to a certain event, you won't even notice it. Maybe it's a certain smell or whatever, and your energy can completely shift, or your reaction can be a completely different way on how you are. And thankfully, cognitive behavior therapy is something I always recommend. But it does take going to a safe place. And it took a while. I remember my first time when I mentioned I was sexually assaulted was in a therapy session, and I was finally opening up. And it was like the last 5 minutes of the therapy session. And I'm like, oh, by the way. And she's like, oh, okay. That just came out of left field. Let's unpick that a little bit. And she even canceled her next meeting, and we talked about it more in depth.
We call that a door handle revelation when it's the last 5 minutes. And it's so often happens that way, right? Because it's hard to do. It's hard to do that and talk about something that we've been silenced for, especially for 5 years. Feeling like you're getting those messages of don't report this, it's not a big deal. 5 years after the sexual assault, and pushing through all of those messages, all of those feelings and outside influences saying, don't talk about it. That is a difficult thing to do, even in therapy.
It definitely took a while for me to open up about it. I mean, it was, I even saw him every day on campus, and actually got to the point where my grades suffered to a point where I just dropped out of college. And I started my entrepreneurial journey and threw myself into my business. And I would go until I was burnt out. And I would take a few months to recharge. And like my business was going like up and down income wise, because I wasn't dealing with things, and I was just going until I was recharged, and then I was burnt out. And it would kept going. And I'm like, this really isn't sustainable. And even my business coaches, life coaches, whatever, they're like, you need to focus on self-care and your mental health. And these are like very well like established coaches who deal with business. And they're telling me that I need to focus on my self-care and mental health. That's always the first thing they say to me. And they keep me accountable in it. And I appreciate that so much. Because I grew up, my parents were real estate investors. My dad ran a company of 2,000 people. So like entrepreneurship runs in my blood. Like my life was dictated by spreadsheets. I was banned from spreadsheets because like that's how I would make all of my decisions. It got to a point where I'm like, I don't want to. Every time it came to emotional decision, I was just extremely emotional. and it took a toll on my mental health. So I'm like, we're just going to spreadsheet it out. Um, I'm really good at spreadsheets, but I was banned from spreadsheets because it got to a point where I wasn't trusting my intuition, and my my business coach was like, "You're not allowed to do spreadsheets," and that lasted 8 months. It's like a big joke now, but I think we really underestimate how much like the connection between business performance and like the society wants us to put like this huge mask on and pretend everything's fine. Well, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Brene Brown, but she talks about the power of vulnerability and just owning where we're at. And I think that's such a powerful thing, because I mean, how can we lead by example, even as entrepreneurs or other people in our life, if we don't know where other people are at, or even if we're not like 100% of like where we're at? So, or even asking for help. And that's why I think we have to just own it. And at the end of the day, it's like, I understand things can be difficult to talk about, but would you rather have the more difficult conversation and be like, I need some help right now, or have it intrude every area of your life?
There are probably three pretty clear mirrors that we can set up for ourselves to look at to really see ourselves. One is having kids, because you see some reflections that you're like, oh man, didn't know that was there. Another one is setting up a business, starting a business, because oh boy, you see those reflections and it really does reflect on ourselves, right? Or managing a team, like, ooh, that is some direct feedback that we get there, right? In how we're doing, how we're managing ourselves, because doing any kind of leadership or management is about managing ourselves. And then the other one being therapy as a mirror, because it really does show us so many things about ourselves. I had when you had talked about the spreadsheets, I immediately panicked and was like, oh my gosh, do I have to give up spreadsheets? But what you were saying, about that, like, that you had lost trust in yourself and in your intuition and in your feelings about the situation being valid, and had kind of placed trust in those spreadsheets. And then it was like, well, the only way to put it back where it belongs, put that trust back in yourself, is to eliminate the thing that we're putting trust in. And I think that is fantastic. I love that. So many decisions that we make, especially in business, and you're in real estate, and so many of these decisions do not make sense on paper. They do not make sense, and your attorney and your tax preparer are like, what are you doing? Why did you do that? Right? That doesn't make any sense on paper, and it really doesn't. And I'm with you. I find that, man, when I go, I know that doesn't make sense on paper, but this is what we're doing, or this is what I'm doing, right? It works out because I'm not a spreadsheet. Like, I'm not a math equation. I'm a person. And I'm the person that it's going to either work out for, right? The exact same outcome could happen to me, to you, Annalise, to Chrissa. And I could be like, that's the best outcome could have happened. And Chrissa could be like, oh, this is terrible, right? So it's the exact same outcome. So if I'm the one who is going to have the outcome and is going to be the person who's going to be the determiner of, like, is this a good outcome or not? Even if it's the same exact outcome, then I need to be the catalyst for what decision happens. So I love that you took your power back from spreadsheets. I think it's so great. And I also love that with your managing your epilepsy and with having panic attacks, and we know panic attacks, they spiral too. The fear of having a panic attack can bring on panic attacks. And that's an essential factor of panic disorder. So when we have these kind of unknowns and the anxiety about unknowns. You mentioned working a 9 to 5 just doesn't work when we have that kind of situation. And so I just really love that you said, you know what, I am like, college for me right now is not the thing. College for me right now is not the thing. So you stopped doing that and you focused on the thing that was the thing, which is your business. And you focused on the thing like, hey, I'm working a 9 to 5 is not going to work for me. And so you focused on the thing that was, and that is. And I just think that that's really beautiful self-acceptance that you did, because you could have spent years trying to make your who you are as a human fit into a 9 to 5 job. You could have spent years trying to fit who you are as a human into college and, finishing college right then when it wasn't the time to, right? Or doing all of these things that wouldn't have made you happy. So I just love that you made those choices for yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it's not, when I told my parents that I wanted to quit college and go into business, well, actually, I told them I wanted to start a vending business, and the vending business hadn't even started. It was a Kijiji ad, and someone was just selling vending machines out of a storage unit. I'm like, I'm going to do that. My dad almost lost it. But
We're like the same person. We're this. Oh gosh, we're gonna have some conversations off the air. Okay.
And at the time we were on a ship. I'm surprised he didn't throw me over. He's like, that's it. But I mean, that business, I used that to also get into real estate. I mean, my epilepsy is a day-to-day basis thing. So what I try to do is I'm like, what are 3 to 5 things that will get me to a little bit better tomorrow in my business and things like that? Like, what is essential, regardless, like if I can even stand up, because there are days with my epilepsy where I cannot stand up. But you know what? We still have a what do you call it? Businesses to run and things that are the way they are. So having like a really good team, I find is so essential. Like, I mean, I'm in real estate, but they all know about my epilepsy and things like that. It's no secret. So having people who you can trust and just work with is so key. I mean, I've done flips from the other side of the country, and like they'll just send me pictures and I'm like, here's like today's to-do list. And here's the spreadsheet. Just working together, because like thing is like we're all in different places and we just collaborate. I mean, they'll have their stuff they're going through. I'm like, okay, what do you need? And they'll vocalize that. And I'm like, okay, awesome. So here's the deadline. I'm gonna bring someone in so we can get to the point, and when you can come back, like, yeah. And because it will also cause me anxiety if we're behind in a project. And this little spiral we don't want. But working together can be like really, collaboration is key. It took a really long time for me to figure that one out. I grew up in a household where it's like no partnerships, like we just struggle along. And I mean, but the thing is, our family was a partnership. And my parents owned a tree farm, a bunch of real estate units that I managed for the longest time. And I managed all of their sales and all that in their nurseries. And they also had online based businesses. So, but like we worked together because my dad is an awesome leader and very good at delegation, things like that, and figuring out whose strengths are what. So growing up with that was also very, very beneficial, because like, believe it or not, not everyone brings everything to the table, but everyone brings something. Like we don't all have it figured out, and definitely took many times for me to fall on my face to figure that one out. Like, I will be the first one to admit, but it also came with this when I allowed myself to be like, myself. I'm doing this all myself. It wasn't good. My mental health struggled. And I mean, I actually got to a point where I just ended up bringing my friends. Our hangouts would be like, I don't have time to go to coffee, but you want to come with me and play vending machines? We would we would go to factories and we would bring like 200 pounds of candy. Um, that would be our hangout. But like being like, maybe you should try this place for a spot, and that also helped me in my business. And I'm like, I will buy you dinner, things like that. And that was probably my first also interaction, collaboration outside of my family. And the thing is, it was hanging out with friends. But
Yeah.
the thing is, everyone brings. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're mentioning like having a team and people supporting you is like a big part of, I mean, just from even your family to now like running your businesses. And I know you mentioned like when you first started doing counseling, you started doing family counseling too. Can you kind of talk about how that was, especially when it doesn't sound like your family was super into counseling before you had to go into therapy when you were 15? So how did that go?
To bring spreadsheets back into it, when I was 15, my father had a spreadsheet of everything I had been through in my entire life on a spreadsheet for the therapist. And so it's kind of how, yeah. So spreadsheets came into in that regard, and it was very performance based. We didn't like to talk about our vulnerabilities, and it can be a bit of a struggle with them. And it is what it is. I'm very thankful for the opportunity that it brought upon. And we disregarded the spreadsheet pretty quickly in that session, those sessions, but it was hard, because once again, like my family, my parents both grew up in a time where it's like you don't lower the mask at all. It's all about performance based, and it is what it is. And that it took a toll and probably wasn't the best scenario at times, but um they gave me a really awesome upbringing with entrepreneurship and opened my eyes to a lot of different things that I wouldn't have been open up to. For example, like starting my own business when I was 13. That was my dad's idea because he was like, you're not going to be able to work a regular 9 to 5. So my dad taught me how to code when I was 13, starting my first online affiliation business. And that was really awesome. And I understand that family therapy can be very difficult. And that probably wasn't my best experience, probably my least favorite, if I'm being completely honest. It was a time where there was a lot of things with my epilepsy going on. We didn't understand mental health to the degree that I do now. And um, I wasn't feeling my feelings. I was shoving it all down. And there would be one trigger and I would set me off, um, and it kind of went along. My dad would be like, I think you have this based on what I'm seeing off of Google. So it'd be like a self-diagnosis thing. And I think you should do this, this, and this. But I also wasn't, because I wasn't feeling the feelings and wasn't allowing it to flow, because that is such an important thing in mental health. I didn't deal with it, and it still affected my family, which is very unfortunate.
So you've been diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Was that at the age of 21 or at the age of 26 after you had talked about the sexual assault, or was that at another time?
I was 21 at the time, and that was just talking about my stuff growing up with epilepsy. And I was also diagnosed with anxiety around at 19. But the panic attacks didn't start until later on, until I really got into the world of business. and wasn't dealing with it properly. There'd be things in business that would happen that would trigger me because there was a lot of unknowns. And I mean, at the time, I had a property management business, different online based businesses. So there was a lot of stuff from legal to just all of it. And trying to figure everything out it was difficult, and I didn't have the self-care tools that I do now. I just went all in and kept going until I was burnt out. And I remember even getting to the point where I could feel my chest was hurting a lot. And that was my normal. I would just keep going.
You mentioned you're now trained in suicide prevention. Can you kind of talk about how you went from 3 suicide attempts yourself to now being trained to help prevent that in other people?
So I wanted to understand how I could help myself in those situations, actually. That's how I got into it. And I was actually a leader in my church, and I ran a young women's, I helped with the young women, and a lot of them were dealing with mental health, especially suicide, but we weren't addressing it, especially in the church. So, and I was having women come to me and not talking about it. And I'm like, okay, I deal with this. You're dealing with this. I'm like, and I went and got certified. And I've struggled with it before and actually after. And but through the certification process, I was able to determine where I was and how to de-escalate myself. And that helped a lot. And how I can stop myself from getting back to that point. And it would be like things like I need to remove myself immediately from the situation, just even go for a walk. Or maybe just I need some self-care, whatever. Maybe watch a Marvel movie because sometimes that's self-care for others, which I'll be the first one to admit that's part of my self-care. But one thing I also, if I'm in a state like that, I've also reached out to others to help determine where I'm at and if I need to go get additional support. There's a great resource now with Ontario where they have, what do you call it? I think it's 311. It's mental health / suicide hotline, and they're fantastic. They're trained in suicide prevention, and like there's been a time where I wasn't feeling great. Like I'll be the first one to admit, because mental health is a process, it's a journey. Sometimes you're gonna have setbacks. And I had a little bit of a setback and I called them and I'm like, I just need some help. Like, and I ended up just needing to talk it through. Sometimes you just need to talk it through. There's resources that are available that are fantastic. And like I personally, I used to be ashamed to even call them, but I'm like, why? These resources are put in place to be able to help me. I understand I'm not in the best scenario right now. These resources are here to take me from maybe I'm at like a 9 to back down. And they're phenomenal. And I had a lot of amazing help. And like, I just want to also say, like, take a minute to say, like, if you're ever in one of those situations and you need to, please do it. Because it later on it could escalate more, and don't ever be in a place where you don't want to reach out because of maybe there's stigma around it or whatever. The thing is, people might not understand, but at the end of the day, reaching out is so much better than staying silent. And I stayed silent a lot, and I suffered a lot with my mental health. And until I started advocating for myself and all that, that's when it got better, and being like, this is what I need. These are my boundaries. This is the self-care stuff I need to do on a regular to make sure that my mental health is in check, etc. And maybe there'll be days where I can only give 10%, but that's the reality. Is sometimes not going to be able to give 100%. but on the days I can only give 10%, what steps do I need to make sure I'm vital? So the next day I can give that other 90% that was missing the day prior. And I think advocating for things like that are so vital.
Absolutely. I love that. Similar to chronic pain management too, right? If I can only do one thing in a day, if I cannot leave my bed, I can do one thing. I'm going to drink water that day. And that is enough that day. And if I can only do two things that day, I cannot get out of bed, but I'm going to drink water and I'm going to eat food that day. And it doesn't have to be healthy food. I'm going to eat food and I'm going to drink water that day. Right. And if I can only do three things and so on. And it sounds like you've just really been able to set those boundaries for yourself, set those priorities for yourself, and allow yourself to be that priority above your business and above your family and above the other people around you. It's so hard for us to say, no, I am the priority in my life. I have to be. I have to be. And I want to be, and I am the priority. I am the most important thing I can care for in my life, and I deserve it. And it's such a hard thing to do, and you are doing it, and it's not easy, and you're still doing it. Well, it's not easy. So we thank you so much for sharing today and sharing your experience and your knowledge and all of the amazing things that you're doing and advocating for mental health. We really appreciate all the work that you're doing. And we thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you back, actually, because I feel like I could talk to you for another 5 hours. So
Yep. I'm Annalise Keck, and I need a counselor.
Awesome.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you're here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find and connect with You Need a Counselor on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, or leave a comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from the podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 800-531-4236. And if you're a provider seeking play therapy CEUs, you can find us on patreon.com/youneedatraining. We'll see you for the next episode, Sunday at 5.